Good evening, everyone. So today we are back with the biology series, and we are starting the biology series with of this week with the talk of Dr. T.S. Keshav Prasad, who is the Deputy Director of Center of Systems Biology and Molecular Biology, Research Center, Unipaya University. He has received Young Investigator Award from Department of Biotechnology, Government of India. He has published over 180 research articles with a total citation of 11,000 and H index of 39 in reputed journals including Nature, Nature Biotechnology, Nature Communications, Genome Research, and Genome Biology. Dr. Prasad has played an important role in establishing proteomics and bioinformatics facilities and research teams in three institutes, including Institute of Bioinformatics Bangalore, NIMHANS Bangalore, and Unipaya University, Bangalore. At Unipaya, he has established a research team on multiomics approaches to investigate human diseases using genomics, proteomics, and metabolomics. His team is venturing pioneering areas of multi-PIM analysis, DIA approaches, and developing new tools for metabolomic analysis and mass spectroscopy-based molecular diagnostics. So here I welcome Dr. Keshav to give his talk on protein structure and how to depict an application based off the proteomics. So welcome, Dr. Keshav. You can please share your
Thank you. So can you see the screen now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Parul, for the short introduction. So we will move on to the very basic talk on proteins. So from I am going to just put up the definitions as well as some introduction to each of the subject under the umbrella of how we study proteins. And one can actually go into the details. If there are some details are required on specific topics, you can discuss for hours together. So in proteomics. So the contents of my talk today will be what are proteins, structure of proteins, basic aspect of functions of proteins and post-translational modifications, what we call as PTMs for short, and how are the proteins studied, how we study them. So what are the protocols we can adopt to study proteins, and proteins in a targeted manner or proteins in a very global manner, like unbiased manner. So then some words like which are very much part of certain protocols or concepts like proteomics, quantitative proteomics, then one particular PTM where phosphorylation plays a major role, what we call as phosphoproteomics, quantitative phosphoproteomics. Then when you do the differences in phosphoproteins on a time scale after a particular insult or a biological condition triggered, which we call as temporal phosphoproteomics. I will tell you the context in which all these things are applicable. With some example studies, we may not have time to discuss each one of them in detail, but people who are interested in them can go through our publications and the work which we do on a regular basis on these subjects. So how to study proteins? So proteins are studied using features of a protein, any matter in this universe. When you study it, you have to first think about different aspects of that particular entity, what we call as features. So sequence can be one feature, sequence of protein structure, amino acid structure, how they are arranged with each other, what physicochemical properties it gives to the amino acid, the polypeptide chain results from that, and then what are the conserved patterns across the different proteins. So that is one way of studying them. Another way is how they are finally attaining its structure, different conformation, different levels of structural complexities. Then how are they modified during the course of its action, during the course of its life cycle inside the cell or in the biological system. And where do we find them often? So when you talk about a cell or a tissue or an entire organism, where we are going to high chance of finding a particular protein in which tissue or in which body fluid, or whether even if it is tissue or cell, in which part of the cell they are often found. This we call as cellular component or low protein localization, subcellular localization. Then what are their association? How they interact with other molecules? Because there are many molecules in the living system. How they interact with other molecules and molecules from the environment and molecules from what we eat, the food and other things. So what are their functions? Each of the proteins each protein may have different functions. What are the functions? Whether there are basically according to the function, can we group them? According to the conserved patterns of their sequence, can we group them? According to where we find them in the cell line, can we group them? So this way we can study their role in certain biological activities. And also when they are disturbed or perturbed or some defects come in them, whether they play a role in the disease or whether there is any change in that protein may not have any consequence or do have any consequence. Do they have any consequence? Result in disease. So can we use them ultimately for the benefit of the society in any means? These are the way you can study proteins. So now what are proteins? So maybe you might have already taken up this, or maybe in the next class somebody is going to tell this. That's what I heard about the central dogma. So that is genome, DNA gives rise to RNA. From RNA, proteins come. Then they are also interact with each other. Proteins regulate RNA, proteins regulate DNA, replication and other things. They have a role with each other. So finally it is DNA has the blueprint which expresses in the form of RNA. RNA is getting converted into protein. So proteins are one of the biological macromolecules, just like RNA and DNA. They form different structures. Proteins are nothing but chain of amino acids, which are connected with each other by a peptide bond. So they result in a polypeptide, and proteins are called building blocks of living system. So once the protein is expressed, it has to undergo several modifications in order to get itself contributing to the function. So now a chain of amino acid, let us go to the structural complexity of protein. Chain of amino acid forms the primary structure of the protein. Let us keep them one after the other. But a chain cannot be straight always. In a fluidic system, it can go to various formation. So when it goes to formation, they have different patterns of existence because of its secondary folding, local folding, because of the amino acid physicochemical properties of amino acid. It can be a helical shape or it can form a pleated sheet form. So this is called secondary structure of the protein. Now when these beta pleated sheets and helices fold over each other because of the weak bonds like disulfide bonds or strong bonds like disulfide bond or van der Waals forces, so they form a kind of tertiary protein structure. They occupy space in a different shapes and then form a complex structure through the folding. And finally, more than one such different folded proteins come together to form a complex, which forms quaternary structure of the protein. So first it is a linear, one-dimensional, then it becomes two-dimensional, then become three-dimensional. Several three-dimensionally structured proteins come together to form a functional unit of the protein, which is the quaternary structure. So I'm not going into the more details of this. So now when you see the amino acid chain, so there are several amino acid chains, the sequences can be conserved across a family of the proteins. So these conserved regions are called we call them as a domains. These are nothing but segment of protein that fold into distinct structural units. Usually the domains have specific function. Then there are short conserved motifs, short sequences which are also conserved, which acts as a recognition site for other proteins or which acts as a signal to export or transport across the cellular components, which we call as motifs. For example, signal peptides or nuclear localization signals or nuclear export signals. When they are present on the protein, they are destined to certain parts of the protein. Or sometimes what happens is domains interact with the motifs or domains interact with the other domains. So that way they recognize each other and they have an attraction towards each other. So for example, SH3 domains containing proteins typically bind to short motifs where proline amino acid, two proline amino acids are interrupted by another two amino acids, any amino acids. So we call this PXXP as motif. Whereas SH3 domain is a large area of the conserved region and it go and specifically bind to the area of these proteins. So these are motifs and domains. So now another feature of a protein is a post-translational modifications. So when the protein is formed in the ribosome, so when the chain is coming out, while it is coming out only, the other amino acid chain is exposed to surrounding cytoplasm, where already some of the modifications of amino acids are started taking place. That's why sometimes it is not post, sometimes they are also call them as co-translational modification. When translation of protein is still happening, these modifications of amino acids takes place. These are nothing but covalent addition of certain groups into certain specific residues of side chains of residues of amino acid chain. So these are enzymatic sometimes they are non-enzymatic. These can be reversible in most cases. Sometimes they are also irreversible because of the physiological condition. These are very important in several biological processes, cell structure formation, as well as molecular functions. And some of the modifications are well known in passing signals from one protein to another and form an extensive network of proteins, cascades of protein networks, where information is passed from one protein to another. We call them as such networks, we call them as signaling pathways. So phosphorylation is one such modification. You can see here, we represented many modifications here for proteins like glycosylation, it can be hydroxylation, ubiquitination, it can be lipidation or sumoylation or phosphorylation or acetylation. There are around 400, over 400 such modifications are known today. But because of the easy availability of reagents and protocols, the phosphorylation was much studied among all these things over the years. Only now we have there are reagents available for us to study other PTMs as efficiently as proteomics, phosphorylation. So now, as you all know, kinases are the molecules which incorporate phosphate molecule into the protein. Especially in human system, it is mostly serine, threonine, and tyrosine amino acid side chain is added to, to this amino acid, phosphate groups are added through enzymes called kinases. So now we also know many kinases today are known as drug targets. They are FDA approved drugs are available to block these kinases, and we have several kinase inhibitors and activators, because of which kinases remain mainly highly studied molecules, and phosphorylation is the highly studied post-translational modification. So now let us come to functions of proteins. So proteins carry out a variety of functions. So in the broad perspective...
10 minutes more.
Hello?
10 minutes to you.
Yeah. So they form a role in muscle contraction, as hormones, immune system, transport and signaling molecules, storage molecules, and various functions they carry out, these proteins carry out. So how we study proteins? So we can study proteins by variety of approaches like a simple SDS page, which is a particular technique, and then 2D gel electrophoresis where you can take these spots and spots which are different between healthy and a disease condition. You can pick up and see that which are those proteins which come only in the disease condition. That way we can study. And then we can also study by a kind of imaging this one of this 2D gel called 2D dye. Then we can also do with the mass spec without having gel free approaches we can do. We can even take out these spots and put in the mass spec and study which are these proteins. We can identify them. We can also take up from the 1D gel. And then we can also do the processing by without gel through the, we call them as gel free approach through LC-MS analysis. And we can also have antibody microarray, MALDI imaging, and then we have conventional Western blot, ELISA, and immunohistochemistry, and various techniques, antibody-based technique to study proteins and identify them. In mass spectrometry, you will actually identify by the mass and mass by charge ratio of various product ions and the main peptide ion, precursor ion, combination of them we used to study as a fingerprint for identification of peptides. And then we blast the peptide into the larger protein structure and we tell that these peptides belong to that protein. That's how we detect that particular protein in a sample. The basic components of mass spectrometer, if you tell, there are various combinations of these basic components. You will have a sample inlet and then you have to ionize anything to go in mass spec and analyze. You have to ionize them. That's why you have an ion source. And then you have an analyzer and a detector inside a vacuum because they should not be disturbed by external molecules. And with the path of ions, how they move in this and fall on the detector, detector will detect what is the mass of that particular this one. Then once this mass comes out, we will have a mass spectrometry search algorithm through which these masses are converted into peptide data. So there are variety of analyzers are available, variety of ion sources are available. Based on the combination of these ions, the mass specs are named is TOF, QTOF, and then Orbitrap, mass spectrometer, Orbitrap tribrid, like that, various names. So a mass spectrometer is not a general, it's not a specific term, it is a general term. So one has to, when we call proteomics, it is a general term, it's a vast area. So there are specific things for specific purposes and each lab adopts different strategies to work on a given question. So when you do proteomics, so when you study proteins singly, you call them like you study it as a protein biology, but whereas entire complement of proteins you start together without any bias by a global fashion, we call them as proteomics. So you can do proteomics of a cell, tissue or organism, and large scale study of proteins and their function comes under proteomics. So then when it comes to quantitative proteomics, you actually determine the amount of proteins in a sample. So when you do thousands and thousands of protein and its abundance and you compare with the multiple conditions, we call it quantitative proteomics. So you can use by SciLac approach or TMT approach. One is metabolic labeling, another one is chemical tagging. So one we call it as in vitro labeling. So various approaches are there to study using quantitative proteomics study. So when you do phosphorylation components of proteomes, like how much phosphorylation is there, where they are there, how many molecules are phosphorylated, and what abundance they are phosphorylated. So when you study these things as a whole, we call them as phosphoproteomics. So you can use, you have to enrich phosphorylated components from the protein mixture, you pull them out and then again do proteomics using mass spectrometry and you study how many of the proteins are identified with the phosphate group on which amino acid, which site. So based on that, each one will have its own function. And when you do large number of proteins which are changing in their phosphorylation site, you collectively see them contributing one signaling pathway. We tell that that particular signaling pathway is altered. So that may be responsible for the disease. When it is responsible for the disease or associated with the disease, that can be a target. of that particular drug, or you can target that molecule by a drug which is suited for that. So that's how all the things are happening. So when you do quantitative phosphoproteomics, so you actually determine the phosphorylation patterns which are changing across different proteins. So when you do this kind of abundance of phosphorylation across large amount of molecules on different time point, let us say that I am introducing an Ayurvedic drug. So yes, immediately when I introduce an Ayurvedic drug, within 2 minutes what happens? Within 4 minutes what happens? Within 32 minutes what happens? Or within 32 hours what happens? So when I do the systematic analysis, I come to know how the Ayurvedic drugs or any other drug or any other biological insult, how it affects the biological system. So that way we can see the drug targets. So we can study the entire signaling pathway which is affected by the drug. So these are the research areas for people to work on biomarker investigations, which we worked on. So chronic meningitis. So it is a simple, similar symptoms, but different etiological agents. There will be different treatment options, but we should have a marker which can distinguish these things very quickly, very early. Then similarly, tuberculosis and sarcoidosis both look alike, but one is infection and another is autoimmune disease. Same way, ischemic stroke and hemorrhagic stroke, one happens because of the clot, another happens because of the hemorrhage. So the treatment is counterproductive. So can we have a marker in protein which are associated with this disease? Similarly, can I identify antigens of a disease or a pathogen in the body fluid like blood or urine? So can I identify the person has fever, but what contributes to the fever? Which fever he has, which acute febrile illness he has, which is the causative agent of this fever. So similarly, you can also use proteomics to study molecular targets of traditional medicine as well as many other drugs. So the proteomics is also, when you study, there are a lot of interdisciplinary area in them. So you can study signaling pathways. You can also use proteins which have come by the mass spectrometry results to annotate genome. We call proteogenomics. Then you can also use proteins to study what are the things associated with particular changes in small molecules, which are called metabolites. So now you can study what is the relation of certain proteins with set of metabolites. We have not studied much of them. We know only certain enzymes and their metabolites. So then can we use these signatures, what we have identified, to identify diseases? Like, can we have what we are doing in ELISA, immunohistochemistry, or various other methods like genetic panels, can we do using proteomics by mass spectrometry? So there are various techniques are coming today as molecular diagnostics in proteomics called data independent acquisition, SWAP, and multiple reaction monitoring, parallel reaction monitoring, and selective reaction monitoring, like that. So we have done a draft map of human proteome under the leadership of Dr. Akhilesh Pandey in Institute of Bioinformatics, where we have done proteomics of 17 adult tissues, 7 fetal tissues, and 6 primary hematopoietic tissues. So this gives you the largest readout of human proteome till today. So this has appeared on the cover of Nature in the year 2014. So if you see a pathway, when you see in the literature, you will see a small set of molecules like this. So TGF-beta will bind here, then it will give certain molecules, it will activate, and then certain complexes are formed. Finally, they will enter into the nucleus and result in certain gene expression. So let us see, this is the simple view of one pathway. But if you go into literature, there will be a lot of molecules, or if you really do a function proteomic analysis or a phosphorylation analysis, you will identify a lot of molecules which are induced by this particular molecule binding to its ligand, its receptor. And what will happen? Some of them even not connected directly to this, but they are induced. So we don't know how they are connected. So if you do one set of matrix of this kind of matrix come up, it will result in topics for many, many PhD students. So many people have to work on solving this new data which comes from a single analysis. Similarly, we have identified targets of curcumin, how the curcumin acts when it acts against any cancer or any other disease, what are the immediate proteins which it is going to activate. And there are several novel molecules which we identified which are activated by curcumin. Similarly, currently we are working on oncostatic activity of Kanchanara guggulu and Madhunashini. So when you do it in combination, when you have a reduction approach, you don't get much of the results. Like when you do Kanchanara alone and Madhunashini alone, they are not that active. But if you see, when you do combination, you get a very, very good synergistic effect. And the dose which is required is very, very less. And it has a lot of effect. So similarly, what happens for the entire molecule profile when the Kanchanara and Madhunashini were together given, where exactly it acts, how it acts against cancer. So now we have solved all these riddles, and now we are going to clinical trial of Kanchanara and Madhunashini in our university soon. Because of COVID, it is delayed. Similarly, we also tracked how ST Madhu improves the neuroprotection in patients suffering from Parkinson's disease. We used a variety of models, and we have done metabolomic analysis, proteomic analysis, careful analysis of all these things, again validated by a vast array of Western blotting work under different conditions. We have finally moved on to ST Madhu is relieving the energy stress and ROS created by AMPK inhibition of mTOR-C1. So finally we reached in mTOR. When we go to mTOR, all the cancer people are also becomes active because they see that most of the cancer drugs today are the mTOR specific. So now ST Madhu can also be anti-cancerous. So we have to test them. So now we wanted to go ahead with the ST Madhu for as a Parkinson's things for a clinical trial because we have now added a lot of data, and on the molecular side we have cracked its biology. So similarly, we can also do a lot of analysis on multiple post-translational modifications. I'm just showing one data. This we don't even need to do experiment. We can take others experiments data, which is a raw file which is present there, and then we can just fish out these molecules from that raw file itself. Because when you have a mass spectrometry data analysis, although there are spectra in the mass spectra, many spectra we know don't assign its corresponding protein because of the multiple post-translational modifications. So now we have identified several phosphorylation, methylation, acetylation, citrination, and totalization, which is already published data for certain proteomic analysis. We can identify a lot of data mining we can do if you have facilities. So like that, we can identify if the person has done gastric cancer to identify a molecular marker, you can also identify new molecular markers under PTMs, which are already post-translational modification and done. With this, there is a variety of things you can do with the proteomics, and you can use use these methods to characterize, the identify new drug targets. You can identify targets of Ayurvedic drugs so that you can legitimize the use, because everybody asks question when you tell that some drug is working, how it is working, how safe it is. So these are the things. So if you identify a molecule, because for example, curcumin has very less bioavailability. People are making various varieties of nano curcumin, yellow curcumin, so many curcumin varieties, modifications, so that it will be available at the target site. So now, instead of curcumin, if you identify curcumin targets, can we identify by screening chemical library already approved chemicals which are in the library can be used for, instead of curcumin, you can use those chemicals which are already approved for certain other diseases. You can repurpose for the anti-cancer activity or any other neurological ailments. So with this, I will stop here, and then if any questions, I would like to take the questions. Thank you. Thank you for giving an opportunity to talk to you, all of you. So I am ready to.
Thank you, sir. The talk was very wonderful with so much insight into proteomics and proteogenomics, and also might have encouraged our listeners to combine different disciplinaries to design their PhD topics or project topics. So I would like to ask the listeners to have any questions to Dr. Fisher. So, sir, I have one question. When you are
Yes.
doing the proteomics data, so how much sample size would be best to predict the best hit marker from the list?
So when you,
Also, can you unshare your slides so people can see you clearly?
okay, can you see me now?
Yeah.
So it is like what question you are asking when you are designing an experiment, based on which you can divide your projects into discovery mode as well as validation mode. When you are doing discovery, you don't need a big data set. You may need to remove inter-individual variation. You may need a small set of samples, because mass spec is also time consuming and expensive. So only to get a clue, you use it. And once you get the molecules, altered molecules, you can then take up those altered molecules and go with the large data set, cohort of individuals for samples to do validation of those molecules. So initially the sample set, you cannot satisfy statistical requirement of sample set in a mass spectrometry experiment for now. So you can do that if you are doing some 100 proteomic analysis of simple one-shot proteomic analysis of 100 serum samples for 1 hour each in the mass spec. You can do that, but you will not identify molecules which you wanted to identify, because you cannot do that deep analysis when you do this quick analysis things. So it is better to do a careful analysis with the small data set, small sample set, discover the molecules, and once you discover the molecule, you pick them up and then go ahead with the large set which is required for the power, statistical, which gives you the statistical power.
I have a question, which is a practical one, which our Ayush listeners or the yoga practitioners may be thinking when they are practicing in their clinics, and they are inspired by our ongoing series and by your talk, and they want to do some proteomics.
Sure.
So, and if, for example, they are very sure that, for example, ashwagandha may work nicely for COVID or post-COVID, and let us say some people in the village are benefiting from their observational studies, and today, after listening to you, they want to do some proteomic study. What will be step 1, 2, 3 for them? How should they start?
There are 2 or 3 things they can do. They can one thing is we can do an in vitro system where we can take up some viruses like the same family viruses if COVID-19 is not available. So, and then treat with the ashwagandha and see what are the drug targets. So where exactly ashwagandha targets it, whether it is modulates the cell system and then makes the cell efficient to target the virus, or they are directly stopping some replication of viruses. So because of some switch, that is the one thing, the first thing. And second thing is they can also use people who have recovered because of ashwagandha. So representative samples, some 20 ashwagandha treated and recovered patients, and 20 ashwagandha treated normal people, and 20 untreated people, or untreated recovered, but untreated not recovered. These samples you can take some 4 or 5 sets depending on how you are comfortable, and you can do serum proteomics, and you can do directly like identify proteins which are high in people who have taken ashwagandha and recovered. So that may be the target, that may be the associated thing. Then you have to do a lot of validation based on molecular biology studies using other systems.
So for the cell culture, we can understand that they will need a BSL lab, but for the non-COVID, maybe, I don't know, maybe they have to collaborate with, find some.
Yeah, you have to find a virologist and then work with them. And then once you do the system ready, you can bring the lysates to us, make it free of virus, and bring the lysate to us, and we can do the proteome of that.
So Dr. Keshav tells us all that he's available for you to probe what is going on by contacting him, and he would like to know, I mean, they may like to know, perhaps for those 20 untreated, treated, recovered, unrecovered, rough idea how much will be the cost involved, so they can accordingly.
So a quantitative proteomics work will cost you around 4 to 5 lakhs.
For
for
20
this
people.
experiment. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It is 4 or 5 groups. So inter-individual, how many are there? It doesn't matter because you are going to identify. You are going to multiplex, as I told you. 10 sets you will do in one experiment. You can push them. Only the processing time and mass spec time takes, and also the labeling cost comes. So mass spec run of around 6 to 18 fractions of these proteins will cost you around 2 to 3 lakhs, and then around 1 lakh, 1.5 lakhs will go in consumable. So the important thing is, more important thing from everything is planning the experiment. So a lot of time we have to think in thought experiments, how we are planning, what are our deliverables, then how we have to design our experiment. If you do it in a hurry, the whole experiments will go bad even after investment of money. So it is very important to design the experiment. At the designing time, you have to contact us or any proteomics experts before even you collect the samples. So because that is also how you have to collect sample, at what time you have to collect sample is also very important.
And how to transport also, perhaps.
Yeah, how to transport, how to store till the transport. So all these things are big issues. So these things one has to discuss a lot, and there are protocols written for these things. There are specific protocols written, so we will exchange them and we will help you.
Thank you. Over to Manjari. You can carry on with the proceedings.
If anyone else is having any question, they can ask. So it seems there are no questions. So I
No,
thank
Pooja is asking something. She's trying to. You can spot her. Pooja, you can unmute yourself and ask. You have to unmute, Pooja. So till she finds a way out, I had a idea that we have been doing a lot of yoga intervention studies. You mentioned very nice Madhunashini, and the combined effect is better, more pronounced, and stuff like that. And a lot of such studies are already ongoing. Are you involved in any of the yoga outcome studies, analyzing the proteomics without yoga or different time points?
We have not done any of those studies right now because it is also very difficult to have people and the very careful cohorts in yoga also. So people are finding it very difficult to have volunteers also who agree to have a specific pattern. And then it also important that what they eat and how they are, lifestyle during this time also very important, because all this will compound your results. Because when you do proteomics, it is highly sensitive, and any small change among the inter-individual variation will affect your results, skew your results. So that's why somebody who is taking care of all these issues in deciding the cohorts is very important before we step into such experiments.
Sure. So for your information, we are got approval for 2 projects. One is in the prisons, where we have these test out individuals and also a homogeneous population by screening them for many mental and other anxiety scores, and they will have the same food, same time. And we have a yoga protocol which will be administered, and those things will be looked in. Also, another one, we have a COVID yoga intervention study, also recently approved by all regulatory committees, and we are just about to launch that also.
That is very great. If we have such samples, I think something meaningful will come out, and definitely yoga will have a lot of effects. There is no doubt about it, because I myself has done yoga for a long period of time in my life, and so it has a lot of effect on your physiology. That's for sure. Because if you have certain ailments, if you do very clearly and you get rid of them over the period of 2 to 3 months. So, but the only thing is, it has to become a part of your life, in order to completely benefit from that, or that is the main issue which actually affects the people. So, but if there are certain people who can take down all these things, careful documentation of what is happening with the cohort, and careful selection of participants, then I think you will get definitely certain molecular signatures, which is happening with you. Similar, a lot of experiments have been done with the exercise also. So people do exercise and they have found a lot of epigenetic changes where a lot of positive genes have been upregulated. So similar kind of things can happen with yogas.
How old samples can you take to your lab can be transported? 1 year, 2 year old, if we have the preserved plasma, serum, or whole blood?
So if they are saved, if they are stored in -80, and then you don't have any problem with the -80 system, I think they should preserve all the protein content, because there should not be any difference between 1 year or 2 year old in -80.
Great, excellent.
But we don't know how they are kept and what other insults they are subjected to, that is the main problem. Happens everywhere.
Thank you, thank you.
So one question has come up on Facebook.
Yeah.
From Dr. Rahul Tyagi. He asked that some people work on pooled data for estimating control samples. So what is your opinion on this?
See, when you are in a discovery system, when you are doing a discovery experiment, because in proteomics you will get large number of proteins which are altered, you will get more than what you really can pursue, more candidates than what you can really pursue later. So when you have that, it is very important to remove inter-individual variation. You have to work on what is common to that particular condition. So COVID with the one individual, two individual, they may be different. So those differences you have to remove in the beginning itself. One way of removing this inter-individual variation is visualizing these proteins in a macro perspective, that is on a gel, and there is no major differences in the gel profile. Such individuals can be pooled. So we actually use a lot of pooling in mass spec experiments. It is not only control, we even pool sometimes the experimental subjects also. So once you identify what is the difference in that group versus the other group, major differences, those forms your candidate, and you can pursue those candidates in individual samples. So that way you can do your sensitivity and specificity calculation, false positive and false negative calculation in using individual samples for a set of 10 molecules or 20 molecules. So you don't need to worry much in the mass spec. You can do individual experiment also mass spec, but it will cost you very high. So you may not get your molecule when you don't go deep. You may get only superficial molecule. When you do cost cutting, you will do a simple mass spec experiment. You may finish your experiment in some 20,000 rupees for one sample. So you may do 5 individual here, 5 individual, it's already 2 lakh rupees. So instead of that, mass spec has, what experiment we are designing is, we are going to remove the abundant proteins from the sample by using depletion technologies. Then we divide the sample into smaller and smaller fractions. So when you do this 12 or 6 or 12 fractions of the main protein, first you pool the samples, label them, then you pool both the experimental things together, then you subject them into fractionation technologies and make them 6 samples or 12 samples of different baskets. Then you subject them into replicates in mass spec analysis or biological replicates of that kind. So you make more mass spec run of the same sample and go deeper in the analysis. So you will identify a lot of low abundant proteins which really have a very significant role as a biomarker or a drug target. So pooling actually helps to remove inter-individual variations, because you are not concerned about inter-individual variation. You are concerned with, oh, these people are treated with the ashwagandha, they recovered. There may be 20 people, 30 people. So we wanted to see common molecules which are changed in them. So that way pooling is not a problem, but how the pooling is done is the issue. What are your study design according you can pool, that is to cut the cost, and then whereas in microarray or RNA-seq analysis you don't pool, you can do them individually. So in proteomics also you can do individual. That's why we developed data independent analysis protocols now. They will get popular over the period of time. So there are many people do individual analysis these days, but everything depends on the cost. So then once you identify the molecule, you do individual experiment for those molecules in your validation experiment by using targeted proteomic analysis, which is cheaper, or your conventional Western blot or ELISA or immunohistochemistry kind of things. And then you determine sensitivity and specificity.
Thank you, sir. Very insightful of that. So I also want to elaborate that after removing these inter subject ranges, we can more specifically get higher significant protein molecules which are
Yeah.
affecting, and the global, we would want to would want to identify a global marker which can go for all the population of basically in India if you're testing.
Yeah.
So here, when you are testing, doing in the when you are doing the genomics, you are very much concerned about the ethical part. What about the proteomics? Are you concerned about the ethical part?
Sure. Same ethics will apply here also.
Sorry, not ethical part, the ethnicity. Sorry.
No, see, whatever applies to genomics will apply to proteomics as well. Because these are all large scale analysis where there is no bias in sample collection. So you have to take care of all this into account.
Any more questions?
Ma'am, I want to ask, so which kind of fluid should be considered best for doing proteomics, like serum, plasma, CSF, or the tissue samples are best for doing proteomics?
No, it depends on which question you are asking. So if you are asking some signaling aspects of, like as I told you, kinases and other things, signaling is usually restricted inside the cell. So then you have to take cells or tissues. Whereas if you want a secreted biomarker, which is coming in for your easy detection, you want to detect in urine or you want to detect in blood, then it is better to take serum and urine. So it depends on your question. There is nothing called which one is best for proteomics. So proteomics is the best technique. It can use any sample. But it is your question and your application decides what you have to take. And also where the disease, how is the disease? For example, if you have a TB, or I'm not telling that, so when there is a TB, MTB, tuberculosis, I think it is better to take sputum instead of blood, because it is highly restricted to one localized to certain form of cells which are cut off from the circulation. So there is no point in taking urine, because urine is a long shot for tuberculosis proteins to travel. So whereas malaria you get all the red blood cells shed at a particular interval of time. So a lot of proteins of malaria will be there in the blood and it can seep into urine. So if you are having some kidney related ailments, urine can form very good body fluid for identifying them. For example, in oral cancer, saliva can be a better choice than urine. So like this, which disease you want to pursue and which application you want, based on that you can select your tissue or body fluid. Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir, but in between plasma and serum, there is usually a question that why are you choosing plasma for doing some studies, and why the serum is being chosen?
I don't think there is too much of advantage or disadvantage in them, because we usually take serum, but I have not put my mind why some people are using plasma or versus serum, because there is not much difference between them, except for a certain set of
Clotting factors.
Yeah, which one is easy to collect, you take that. Because, and also another thing, you have to see that the collection and processing, which one is more standardized and which one is more easier, which the people who can take out the blood can handle. So depending on that, you collect them.
Okay, sir. Sir, I want to ask that how much time sputum samples can be stored? Like plasma and serum can be stored for longer. So is the protein
You can store once it comes to -80, there is no issue. You can
in
store
case of sputum samples also?
Yeah. But only thing again, when you go to -80, you have to see if there are questions, because if your sample has cells, though these cells will break down once you are thawing and freezing. Okay, so if you are looking only for serum or secreted markers, it is important for you that you have to remove all the intact cells from that separate before you are storing in minority. So, for example, milk, because milk will have a lot of cells, somatic cells. So, somatic cells has to be removed before you freeze them. Take out the milk. So then also certain things like serum also, it is better to have one centrifugation before you store the sample. So these are very, very important because and repeated freeze thawing also not advised. So there will be changes at every level. So that's why if you are saving samples, you save in aliquots so that you can have to take only certain aliquots for your every experiments. You should not store them as a bulk, you know. When you are storing the sample, you have to store them in multiple aliquots so that you will not subject them into repeated freeze thaw cycle.
Yes, sir. And if in case our plasma gets precipitated, so that means that plasma is no longer usable for such studies.
See, one thing you have to take care in proteomics is you should not allow this hemolysis to take place.
Okay.
And because once these things happen, there are a lot of other proteins from this one will come and interfere your experiments. So you have to take care of that while you are doing serum or plasma collection. There should not be any hemolysis. And the color and precipitant and everything should look alike. And any doubtful sample, you should note down and keep them separate. You can use only for validation. You should not use it for discovery.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any more questions? I think it's a very wonderful presentation, and our students also have many questions for you. Maybe they'll be asking you again.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Yes, sir. Thank you for coming here and giving the talk on this platform. And all the non-biologists might have also be very, very much enlightened by your talk. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the organizers for giving me the opportunity.